Consequence Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith With, an audio interview series presented by WFPK, Independent Louisville, Consequence of Sounds, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Where are you listening from? Are you getting us on the podcast? Can you leave a rating or a review? iTunes, Podchase, or maybe you're checking this out on YouTube, and you can hit the subscribe button over there. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today, my guest is Ruban Nielson of the band Unknown Mortal Orchestra. They got a brand new record out called Sex and Food. We were actually supposed to talk a couple weeks ago, but on the day that the interview was slated for, Ruban was attacked outside of a bar, beaten up somewhat bad. He still played the show that night, and he tells us all about that unfortunate evening. Of course, we also get into the record Sex and Food, all the locations around the world that this was written and recorded in, especially Vietnam and Iceland. There's some talk about American Guilt, the song, but how he also sees the culture coming from New Zealand and living in the United States, and the trick of writing a song for your child and not making it cheesy. It's Kyle Meredith with Unknown Mortal Orchestra.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well, yeah.
We were set to do this interview a couple weeks ago, and I think you were in Portland, and something bad happened that you'd written about on Twitter about being held up or something. What was the story there? Because that was really concerning. I only caught what you had put out online.
Well, yeah, so I was just at a bar after the show, and I was sitting in the street just smoking a cigarette with some friends, and some guys came up behind me and just jumped me, and just kind of, somebody hit me in the back of the head, and I fell over, and then, it just kind of turned into chaos.
Just out of nowhere.
Yeah, it was, the next day I kind of thought like, trying to put together, whether I'd said something or whatever, which would have been pretty unlikely. Like, I'm a pretty happy drunk, and I'm a pretty non-violent kind of person, so I kind of was putting the story together, and the best I can come up with is somebody just rolled up from behind me and just attacked me, so I didn't get better about it or anything like that. I just consider it one of those kind of weird, random things that happens.
It's scary, though.
It is scary. I was just thinking, like, I'm, getting to the point now where I probably shouldn't be kind of wandering around in, dangerous neighborhoods and drinking out in the street and stuff like that. It's kind of a little bit past that point in my career where I'm kind of able to do that kind of thing. So it was kind of a pretty hard lesson, but the kind of result of that was that, I kind of got up the next day, and my face was all puffy, and I had a black eye and busted lip and all this stuff, and I was just thinking, like, I guess I should probably just try to do the shows, and so I just kind of kept playing, which was quite hard, but I didn't know what else to do. It kind of would have felt like they really disrupted my life if I had to cancel a show or something like that, so I kind of thought like it was a way of kind of fighting back a bit.
It's also pretty punk rock of you. You get on stage, and in some sense, you're bruised and bleeding in some direction. That's so.
Yeah, I mean, it gives me some degree of like professional pride, kind of like the show must go on or whatever.
Well, that sort of leads into this new record, Sex and Food, in an odd way, but. As you talk about, one of the pitches, one of the stories of this record is that it just took place all around the world. Like, this is recorded in, it seems like, all corners of the earth, which is sort of awesome. When you put yourself, when you're on tour, you kind of just pass through a place, but when you put yourself there to create and make something, even for just a few days, in a somewhat intimate environment with it maybe leads to adventures. This being one of the unfortunate ones that happened on tour, but did any other, I don't know, maybe better adventures come out of recording this because how many places were you in for this LP?
I think it was five or six. It was Portland. I did all the mixing and everything at home in Portland, Oregon. And then I recorded in Auckland, New Zealand, Reykjavik in Iceland, Seoul, Korea, Hanoi, Vietnam, and Mexico City.
Well, and they're all sort of exotic in that, I mean that in the way that people, have these images of those places in their head just by what we romanticize about them, I guess. Did any of those live up to those romantic notions for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just kind of had, I was working in Portland, and I'm pretty DIY about how I make my records and stuff, but making a few records in my home studio. I just thought it might be, I might get bored just being in the same place all the time. So I just sort of took some of my recording budget and put it into traveling and stuff like that. And I would just kind of come up with almost a random place, like somewhere that I would think, maybe I should go to Vietnam. Maybe that'll be inspiring. And so I'd just go there. And then I didn't really have any practical reason to go to those places. It was just somewhere that seemed like it might be inspiring. But yeah, it was some of the places that surprised me, and they were different from what I thought they were going to be like. And some of the places were kind of surprisingly like they were in my imagination, I guess. Like Hanoi in Vietnam was much more like Vietnam-like than I thought it was going to be. I kind of thought maybe like it would be modernized and kind of different from the way that I grew up kind of watching it in TV shows and movies about Vietnam. But it was kind of a lot like on the way to the studio, we'd see lots of, we'd walk through like lotus farms, and we see like walk past fishermen kind of every day and stuff like that. So it was very, very cool.
That's great. I do love hearing that, because I'm the same way. You kind of expect that every place is sort of become homogenized and gentrified and everything else across the world, and to know that there are those that those places still exist in the way that you hope they exist locally. Yeah. It was. I feel the same way. Yeah, and Iceland was really inspiring in that way too, because it was. I guess my main reference for Iceland was like Bjork's music. Right. So I kind of had this idea that it was just kind of this place with a lot of kind of physical beauty and stuff like that. But it was like some parts of Iceland are like a moonscape, and some parts of it reminded me a lot of where I'm from in New Zealand, but in a sort of even more exaggerated kind of way. It was almost like just getting inspired by the landscape itself was enough. Like it wasn't like in Hanoi, I feel like it was very much partly the weather and the landscape, but also the people and the culture and the kind of energy there. But in Iceland, there's a few people that it was kind of more about, like, kind of just the things that I was seeing and stuff like that. Yeah. Well, I'll use that to kind of seg into one of the songs on here, because as you travel the world, you're from New Zealand, you live in Portland, you have the song American Guilt. It's been talked about, written about somewhat a lot, because that's low-hanging fruit with a title right there, if you're a journalist, by the way. It's got to give you a unique vantage to what's going, because you have lived here for quite a while now, but you're still in imports, in a strong sense, and to see it all, what is the effect of that on you?
I don't know. I find it harder to kind of figure out like who, what my identity would be if I was to choose something. You know what I mean? Because it's weird, because identity is such a huge part of the culture right now, and I've always had trouble with taking sides and things like that. I grew up mixed race, and I grew up in New Zealand, and kind of have 3 different passports, and kind of I travel for a living, and have lived in a few different places. And I just kind of find myself, it's a little bit hard for me to relate to some of the divides that I see in the culture at the moment. Just as a natural thing, I don't naturally take sides in a lot of these kind of conflicts and stuff, political divides and things like that. So I suppose a lot of my music is kind of inspired by that, or is trying to convey that or something, I guess.
Does it come across as unnecessary? Is that one of the things you're trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem more like a little bit like I mean, I suppose unnecessary, but it's also tragic as well. It's not just like I see it as being silly. It's sort of a little bit heavier than that, but it does seem like there's something missing from the conversation, some kind of humanity that's being kind of lost in the shuffle or something. I think just a lot of the conflicts I find it really hard to relate to.
Well, I'll take one of the lighter sides of the album then with Honeybee, which is one of my favorite singles of the year right now. This is a song from a parent to a child?
Yeah, I mean, it was the first time I did anything with that song was I was putting my daughter to sleep, and I was just kind of singing some things to her that would to kind of calm her down and make her laugh a little bit and stuff like that. And I was kind of, after she fell asleep, I recorded a little bit and just kind of stopped thinking about it and just kind of put it on my computer somewhere and forgot about it. And then later I was thinking about it, and I kind of pulled it back out after a few years, and I suppose I just kind of felt ready to write that song. I suppose I thought it could end up really cheesy, or that it might not be worth turning into something, a song for the world. But I don't know, I just felt like in this time, and especially for this album, since it seemed to be a lot of kind of conflict and strange emotions and stuff on the album, I thought it might be nice to put something that pure and simple on the record.
That's the thing, because there is a long history of artists writing songs for their children and babies or unborn babies, and a lot of them are sort of bad and cheesy.
Yeah. It's hard.
And this isn't one of them.
Genre. Yeah. It was one of the things that because sometimes it's just like a songwriting challenge. Sometimes I think, can I write a song about something this earnest and have it still kind of resonate in a way that's like worth listening to. So that was something that really, it's kind of a challenge. And I've been writing songs for a while, so sometimes setting myself up something that seems like hard is sometimes really fun. So yeah.
Well, I'm a big fan of it, and this record, I really do enjoy what you're doing out there. So I thank you for the music, and I thank you for the call today. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much.
All right, man. Take care.
Okay, see you.
All right, bye. Hey, thanks to Ruban Nielson of Unknown Mortal Orchestra for giving me the call. The new record is called Sex and Food. You can subscribe to Consequence of Sound's YouTube channel to keep up with your favorite artists and interviews. If you're listening to the podcast, please do head over to iTunes, Podchaser. Leave us a rating or review. Really appreciate that. And then head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show every Monday through Thursday from noon to 3 Eastern. I'm Kyle Meredith, and I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.